will begin the changing phases and faces of Newbury/Newberry Creek by yours truly, Mr. John Gill. John's right here, and Kathleen. So we typically study history in slices, focused topics, parts, or slices of the total history of a place. The churches of Appleton, the taverns of Appleton, the mayors of Appleton, for example. The history of Appleton itself is but a slice of the history of Wisconsin or the United States. This presentation looks at a slice of the landscape of Appleton, the lands in the immediate vicinity of Newbury/Newberry Creek. The creek is south of the Fox River and flows north into it. How have the lands around the creek been used and developed over the last 175 years or so? That is what we intend to discover. This project arose out of John Gill's college essay on the soils of Newberry Creek that he wrote in 2005. John grew up in the area, and his essay went beyond soils to the folks who lived on the land. With that start, we further researched the areas of interest which are now included in this presentation. On the way, Kathleen Westbrook crossed our path, or should we say, crossed the creek, and provided a wonderful addition to our project. It is now attached as the appendix. Her great-great-grandfather was John Dick, thus the appendix, if you will. All right, prehistoric. Chapter 2, prehistoric. Professor Ray Whitbeck in 1915 wrote the Geography of the Fox-Winnebago Valley. It was published by the Wisconsin Geological and Natural History Survey. It's a must-read for those who wish to understand how the underlying geology and the movements of the glaciers impacted the Fox River and its valley. Interesting is the way the Niagara Escarpment and the glacial lobe resulted in the exit of the river from Lake Winnebago being in the northwest corner of the lake instead of the shorter route to Green Bay from the northeast corner. It was the escape at the northwestern corner that created the easterly directed part of the river that formed the rapids or chutes and the important future industrial water power source. 80% of the river's fall between Lake Winnebago and Green Bay is within the 9-mile stretch between Appleton and Kaukauna. For our purposes, here the following from Whitbeck. Near Lake Winnebago, and again near Green Bay, the river has very low banks. But throughout 3/4 of its length, it flows between steeply rising banks of red clay, averaging 30 or 40 feet in height. The present river channel shows by the steepness of its earth banks that it is youthful. The flat surface of the upland on either side of the channel is somewhat cut up by ravines, the courses of temporary or extinct tributaries of the Fox. The lower Fox has no tributaries of any size, but the plain adjacent to the river is cut by many deep, narrow ravines in which small streams once flowed, most of which are now dry. One of those tributaries is Newberry Creek. Now, what the Native Americans may have called this stream of water long before it was named for Mr. Newberry is sadly lost in the fog of history. What we do know is that the Menominee Indians, via a treaty with the United States dated February 8, 1831, at Washington, D.C., conveyed to the United States the lands that included and surrounded what would become Newbury Creek. It was Treaty Number 160, which we'll see on a map in a second. Now, Appleton, south of the river then, was surveyed 3 years later in 1834, and most of it, all that adjoined the river, passed into private hands in 1835. The greater part, amounting to more than 1,000 acres, and including 2 miles of shoreline and Grand Chute Island, went to Walter L. Newberry, a famous real estate operator in Chicago. Now, the next page shows the map, the relief map, and you can sort of see that the shorter route would have been from the northeast corner going straight up to Green Bay, rather than the little bit farther route off the northwest corner, which then required the river to go east and give us the water power that it turns out we like. The next map is just a close-up of the prior relief map. And the following map shows Treaty 160, which is what the Menominee Indians, including Newberry Creek, sold in 1831. We'll skip the next, it's just a word description of it. The next is an early survey map of the creek. And then the next is a city of Appleton from 1889 that shows the creek, again, south of the river here. Here's where we are. And then the next map is a modern map which shows in blue the route of the creek through the golf course and up to John Street and to the Lawrence Athletic Field. Now, if you'll turn to chapter 3, which is Walter L. Newberry and Edward West. The 1872 and 1889 to 90 Appleton City directories refer to Newbury, B-U-R-Y, Street, as does the official 1872 city map prepared by John Stevens and which is framed over on the table that. On that map is also shown large tracts of land on the southeast side of Appleton owned by Newbury Estate. Yet the street today is called Newberry, B-E-R-R-Y, and has been so named since the 1893-1894 city directory. I'm just going to make sure that Dave and Artis, who just walked in, are with us on here. There, we're on that page. Okay. You can share with David there. Now, we don't know, I think that's my next sentence, we don't know why Stevens in the city directory, we don't know why they used the name B-U-R-Y. But we do know that the correct spelling is B-E-R-R-Y. Why do we know that? We know that because an early speculator who bought those lands in 1837 was Chicago resident Walter L. Newberry. But why does the 1872 Stevens map show ownership in an estate, the Newbury Estate? That is because 4 years earlier, in 1868, Walter L. Newberry died on the steamship Pierre while en route to France. So now all of his lands, including the speculated lands that he owned here in Appleton, went to his estate. Born in Connecticut in 1804, Newberry went to Detroit in 1826, founded a successful dry goods store. He joined a syndicate that included William Astor and Lewis Cass, a name I'm sure you are familiar with, investing in real estate. He moved to Chicago in 1833 and 4 years later bought the Appleton lands. Upon his death, his will provided for his wife and daughters and then for a public library in Chicago, the Newberry Library, a famous research library that's still in existence. From 1868 to the final distribution to the library in 1892, the estate's trustees were charged with the sale of the Newberry lands. Walter L. Newberry's name lives on in a library in Chicago and in a street and trail here in Appleton. And the next shows that Newberry Trail dedication map. Well, what about Edward West? Edward West was born in Perry County, Pennsylvania in 1818. After 3 years of study at Washington College, he left for Detroit in 1836, and then on his way to Milwaukee, walked across to St. Joseph, Michigan, where he caught a schooner across the lake. Arriving in Milwaukee, he noticed it was largely occupied by native Indians. The treaties with the Indians provided that until the surveys of the ceded lands were completed, the Indians could remain on their lands. The surveys were not completed for another 4 years or so. West himself helped with the surveying. He built a small log cabin in Milwaukee with the help of his Indian neighbors. His bedding consisted of wild hay covered with blankets. His neighbors were members of the Winnebago, Chippewa, Potawatomi, and Menominee tribes. The village of Milwaukee grew quite rapidly. West was offered a position as public school teacher, which he accepted, becoming the first teacher of the first public school of Wisconsin Territory. He later farmed in western Milwaukee County. In 1852, he leased out the farm and moved to Appleton, 1852. He first purchased 100 acres on the north boundary of the village, and then in January of 1855, he purchased 533 acres of land on the south side of the Fox River, including Grand Chute Island, and later made other purchases of city real estate. West was one of the first to foresee the great advantages to be derived from the water power of the river. He at once began improving the flow of water at the upper portion of the Grand Chute Island and opened up a water power by constructing a dam across the south channel and selling some water power lots. In 1870, he dug the West Canal through nearly the entire length of the island. And I think there's a repeat there. The construction of the Grand Canal was without doubt the most important of all Appleton's improvements. And as long as water flows down the Fox River, the canal with its manufacturing establishments will be a living monument to its enterprising builder. The following was written about Mr. West in 1895. Mr. West's biography is replete with incidents that illustrate clearly the condition of the Northwest more than half a century ago. His life has been most active, and the hardships he has passed through would have discouraged any but a man of great force and of stout heart. His career should serve as a lesson to the young and prove to them that hard and steady work combined with honor and integrity are the forces of success. He is now 77 years of age, but in appearance much younger. His physique is robust and his health perfect. He has never indulged in the use of tobacco or ardent spirits, and his present physical vigor is undoubtedly due to this fact. So the lands that the Newberry Creek flowed through in 1872 were owned by Mr. West and Mr. Newberry's estate, as shown on the following, that's a typo, it should be 1872 map. So as you look on this portion of the 1872 map, underlined Newberry Estate, Edward West. They've got the whole package, so to speak. Now, John, in his paper, determined that there were really 6 areas surrounding Newberry Creek. So that's the next page, developing areas surrounding Newberry Creek. Basically 6. Each has affected the look of the creek or has affected the way the creek runs its course through the area. The first was Lawrence College, the Lawrence University athletic field. The second was the Institute of Paper Chemistry that is now a number of different businesses. The third was Reed Municipal Golf Course. The fourth was Esterbrook Farm. The fifth was Kernan addition to the city of Appleton. And the sixth was the Lawrence University Bonteball. And on the next map, you'll see those 6 areas numbered on that map. Now, let's start with Chapter 4, the Lawrence College Athletic Field. The 1909 aerial, which is Lawrence's yearbook, notes that the athletic grounds were purchased in 1900. The original Alexander Gymnasium was built in 1901. A later aerial relates that the new Alexander Gymnasium was built in 1929. This area lies north of East-South River Street, west of John Street, as shown on the following map. Now, Alexander Gym is named after L.M. Alexander, who was president of the Lawrence Board of Trustees for 35 years. He died in 1934 and had given $16,000 for the original 1901 gym and $200,000 towards the 1929 gym. He was president of the Nakusa Edwards Paper Company up on the Wisconsin River, one of the national founders of the Chamber of Commerce, and he was one of the 7 charter members of the Institute of Paper Chemistry. Then Chapter 5 is the Institute of Paper Chemistry. So just across the street from the athletic fields was the Institute of Paper Chemistry. The following description was in the 1931 aerial. The Institute of Paper Chemistry, February 5, 1930, marked the inauguration of Lawrence College's first complete graduate school unit, the Institute of Paper Chemistry. The Institute, endorsed by President Herbert Hoover and Dr. Julius Klein, Assistant Secretary of the U.S. Department of Commerce, represents a $1 million endowment project financed by 90% of the paper mills of Wisconsin. It opens its doors with an annual operating budget of $60,000. Dr. Otto Kress, internationally known paper expert, heads the technical staff as technical director of the Institute. Ms. Yordis Roseth, formerly engaged in research chemistry at Hawkesbury, Ontario, Canada, and a native of Norway, is the Institute librarian and bibliophile. Other instructors in the Institute, including the following members of the Lawrence College faculty: Dr. L.A. Yautz, Professor of Chemistry; Dr. Stephen Darling, Associate Professor of Chemistry; Professor W.E. Rogers of the Botany Department; and G.C. Cast, Professor of German. The purpose of the Institute calls for a provision to train students in pulp and chemistry, to provide a comprehensive research library for the use of the industry and students, and to centralize facilities for research in the interest of the industry as a whole. Enrollment in the Institute is limited to those candidates who have a BA or BS degree and a major in science. Now, this area on the edge of the creek and on the edge also of Estabrook Farm that we'll get to comprised the middle section of Newberry Creek. In 1929, the Institute was founded by surrounding area paper companies such as Kimberly-Clark, Bergstrom, Fox River, and Consolidated, to name a few. Research was conducted for 50 years at the Institute in ways to grow trees in the test tube and other mediums. Through the years 1929 to 1979, trees were periodically planted in the areas surrounding not only Newberry Creek, but also in the areas surrounding Reed Golf Course, Estabrook Farm, and the Lawrence Athletic Field. The following is from John Gill's 2005 paper. By the way, the Institute moved to Georgia eventually. John says, in my adventures along Newberry Creek, ranging from what would now be called dirt biking with no brakes to exploring the seas on a Viking ship, actually the eroded roots of basswood, to rummaging through the incomplete structures of the new Estabrook Court and South Meadows Drive real estate development, I recall finding a chemistry lab beaker. That beaker, which was used to store my coins at home, was found at the site referenced in the following summaries of newspaper articles. I thought nothing about that incident until I learned of the following summaries of 2 newspaper articles. And the articles go on to indicate the Institute paper chemistry site is a toxic site for the DNR, but no imminent threat. So presumably those coins that you picked out of the beaker are safe and haven't caused you any permanent harm.
Well, 6 of my sisters had cancer, so.
Oh, a sister had, okay. So I'll leave the rest of that area for you to read at your leisure, including the article from May 21st of '89, which is the article John's referencing there. But now I want you to get to this picture here, which is just at the end of that picture. And here's why I want you to focus on that picture. And it's from the end papers of a book about Lawrence University. Here is the main campus, okay? Here's the Fox River. Here's the John Street Bridge. Here's the athletic field. Here's Alexander Gymnasium. And then right across the street with the little tower on it is the Institute of Paper Chemistry. But what I really like is in the far left upper corner is Newberry Creek. The only time I've seen something that sort of visualized the creek coming through there. Now, Reed Municipal Golf Course. How many know why it's called Reed Municipal Golf Course? Well, you will leave tonight knowing that. It's named after Estella Reed. The golf course, which was approximately 80 acres initially, surrounds the beginnings, or the headwaters, if you will, of Newberry Creek. This area is often flooded, being on an alluvial floodplain, and although very fertile, could not be properly used for farming or for pasture in the 1920s. Much of the surrounding land is comprised of silt loam, and the creek bed itself more of a clay soil. Originally a 9-hole course, later additions of about 45 acres allowed the expansion to 18 holes. While this area was used for golf in the summer, in the winter the area was used for skiing and sledding and ice skating and tobogganing, as it is so used still today. The land has some extremely sharp inclines and slopes. In some areas of the golf course, the creek bed has been channeled through culverts, tunnels, or cement waterways used to control flooding on the course. Then, the next page. The city of Appleton, as we know, founded in 1857, opened Appleton Municipal Golf Course on Labor Day 1928. Anybody here was here no, okay. As a 9-hole course, which was designed by local golfers. 3 years later, city park officials considered purchasing adjacent land to expand the course to 18 holes, but the park board felt the land cost was too high. By 1940, however, talk resumed regarding the purchase of an adjacent 87-acre farm with the mortgage to be repaid by golf fees. The option was not considered because the Knuth farm was south of the existing golf course and outside the city limits. A generous gift from Estelle Reed allowed the golf course to expand from its original holes to 18. Estelle, the daughter of Thomas Reed, former owner and editor of the Appleton Post, bequeathed her money to many organizations which enhanced the city of Appleton. First, her money established a library science scholarship at Lawrence. And second, she allocated funds to improve recreational opportunities through parks and playgrounds. In August of 1940, a judge ruled that the city of Appleton could use $10,000 from the will of Estelle Reed to develop an addition to the municipal golf course. The following month, the park board closed on the purchase of 52 acres for $11,000. Is that about what the going rate is for 52 acres today, 11,000? Plus some special assessments. A week later, construction started on the second 9, which opened in April 1941. There may be some here that were there for that opening. Reed Golf Course was officially dedicated on July 23, 1941, as an 18-hole course. The name was changed from Appleton Municipal to Reed Municipal in the 1950s to honor Estelle's legacy. The plaque announcing the name change was originally placed on the first hole, but has since moved above the fireplace in the clubhouse. Thus, Reed Golf Course. And there are some additional pages that tell you a little bit more about the brief history and a picture of the course, and then a 1940 map that points out to the Lawrence athletic field, the Institute of Paper Chemistry, and the original part of the golf course. And then when you're ready, get to chapter 7 and Esterbrook Farm. Many of you, I'm sure, know that there's an Esterbrook Court on the south side of Appleton. But did you know why it was called Esterbrook Court? I did not until I read John Gill's paper. Esther Harwood had a riding academy with 18 horses, including her own pair of dappled grays, one by the name of Ace. Boarders of horses included Dr. Darling, Mr. Heckert of Heckert's Shoes, and Ms. Pentalini, an area school teacher. The farm, named after Esther Harwood and known as Esterbrook, was approximately 160 acres in size, had a white painted fence around the perimeter. There were trails meandering through the creek and wooded areas, which had names such as Sleepy Hollow Ridge Trail, Christmas Tree Lane, and Honeysuckle Trail. Some trails went through picnic areas, apple orchards on the edge of the golf course, along the edge of the Institute of Paper Chemistry, and some ran as far as Tallulah Park. The horse stable had a large living area where the Harwoods could host parties for guests. John's uncle Alvin Nyman, handyman for the farm, was the caretaker for the horses. In the winter of 1941, as the horses slipped on the ice on the original West Avenue, Alvin was kicked by both front hooves in the stomach and taken to the hospital, where he was treated by the now famous Wilhelm Defoe's father. Adjoining the horse farm was a small parcel of land owned by John's uncle Alvin, which was part of the Conrad Alfieri farm. This parcel of land, as John writes, was at this time in his father's name. The area where the house was built in 1946 by my father stands in the middle of what was Alfieri's orchard. Conrad Alfieri, an immigrant from the wine-growing regions of Germany, grew many types of fruits to make wines. Conrad insisted on using a cement compactor to roll on his fields. As a consequence, the Alfieri fields had the hazard of runoff. The compactor now stands in disuse in an evergreen bed designed by his great-granddaughter, who presently lives in the house. The properties that were once part of the Alfieri farm have been planted with various coniferous trees to control drainage and erosion over the last 10 years. And the next page is a picture of the old Esterbrook farmhouse after it was moved onto Kernan Avenue, very near where John and his family lived. The remaining area that encircled the creek have had many improvements done over the years. The old Esterbrook farmhouse, carried across the open fields when the real estate development project began, now stands proudly at 1013 Kernan Avenue. The homes at 31 and 33 South Meadows Drive, and we have some folks here tonight who live in that neck of the woods, stand where the farmhouse and stable once stood. The owner of then property at 33 South Meadows Drive, Mr. Pavolny, recalls the property when he bought the last remaining property to be developed. The only problem that the Pavolnys have experienced is a sinking patio in their backyard. They had discovered the old well for the stable. Other than this minor problem, their property is nicely manicured with steps that run down to the creek. They have a manicured park setting that still shows evidence of the farm. The pathways for the park area is the remains of the old road to the stable. The Gill and Alfieri properties have spruce and fir trees planted with no further erosion and manicured lawns to slow runoff in the area. The property is no longer annually compacted. The poplar, maple, mulberry, butternut, black walnut, blue spruce, Fraser fir, double balsam, wild grapes and Concord grapes, raspberry, asparagus, yew, and arborvitae are all growing well, although there are no longer horses in the area. The land that had natural compost piles with the horse manure and decaying leaves and occasional grass clippings still continues to create the beautiful earthy humus that ends up enriching the silt clay loam in the area. And there's a map that points to Esterbrook Court and South Meadows Drive area. And then the official plat for the South Meadows development, which includes Esterbrook Court. Now, Section 8, Kernan Farm and Addition. Outlined in pink on the map that's the next page is the approximate area of the Kernan Addition per the map from the courthouse. Next is the official 1899 map of Kernan Addition to the city of Appleton. In the subsequent years, there have also been many smaller plats carved out of the larger area, which now provides homes for many Appletonians. After the maps is an excerpt from John Gill's paper. Again, the Gill home was located at 921 South Kernan, very near where the Estabrook home was moved at 1013 South Kernan. John was born in 1953. His dad moved to Appleton in 1939, and he told me this evening that his dad bought the land on Kernan Avenue in about 1946. So here's John. Looking out the upstairs back window, I am reminded of the farms that were once part of the area in which I live. Once known as the John D. Kernan Farm, part of the Newberry addition to Appleton. The farm was located at that time on the far southeast side of Appleton. The Kernan Farm, which included the Newberry Creek, comprised most of Section 36, or approximately 640 acres. I can't help wondering what changes, faces, or phases has this land gone through, and what is the land used for at the present time? Having the creek as the backdrop for numerous hours of exploration and adventure during my childhood, I enjoyed discovering things about this area. As the rich, earthy smell of the ravine and creek beds come to mind, I ask what types of soil are included in this area, and how did that affect the way the soils were used? And only John would think of those questions, I think. You're unique in that way, my friend. Now, Section 9, the Lawrence University Bonta Bowl. Following are a photograph of the construction of the football field, some pages from the Lawrence website discussing the upgrading of the bowl, but the appendix by Kathleen Westbrook, her story of life on the lands with the creek running through them, a large part of which is the Bonta Bowl. And we'll get to her in the appendix, if you will. The Lawrence University football and soccer programs stepped into a new area in the school's athletic program in 2015 with the renovation of the Bonta Bowl. The football soccer facility would not have been possible without the generosity of George Bonta Jr., class of 1910. The Bonta Bowl was rededicated after Bonta's death in his honor in 1978. Originally called the Lawrence Bowl, the stadium was an anonymous gift from Bonta, one of many he made to Lawrence during his lifetime. The stadium has been renamed Ron Roberts Field at the Bonta Bowl to coincide with the renovation of the facility in 2015. Construction of the stadium in this location seems like a no-brainer to us now, but looking back, it was nothing short of inspiration in 1965. Appleton, as you all know, is a system of natural ravines, and the Bonta Bowl rests comfortably in one of them, a ravine caused by our Newberry Creek. The 3,634-seat stadium has its bleachers tucked neatly into the surrounding tree-lined hillsides. When football and soccer seasons are in full swing, the colors of autumn light up Saturday afternoons in the Bonta Bowl, forming a union between the game and the natural beauty surrounding it. We will touch touch base more on this when we get to the appendix. So the conclusion. From a glacial meltwater creek flowing into the historic Fox River to an often hidden waterway through a golf course, alongside numerous residences, and then business buildings, and then athletic fields, and the new development along that Fox River, our Newberry Creek has seen many changes in the last 175 years. It has witnessed much, including the following from John's paper. On one occasion in particular, after a July 4 downpour, myself and approximately 20 other children, along with a few brave adults, rode the waves of the overflowing creek for a 1/4 mile ride. What started as rill erosion in a matter of minutes turned the small channels into gullies. And John is going to demonstrate for us a little later how he made that ride. Now, we hope you've enjoyed this look into a slice of Appleton's history, Newberry Creek and its adjacent lands, and the phases and faces that it has witnessed over the years. And the following page is a topographical, again, that shows where. Now, then we get to the appendix, if you'll excuse the pun, A History of the Dick Family and Newberry Creek by Kathleen Westbrook. And she writes, one beautiful afternoon in early October 2022, I was on the Newberry Trail between stops on Christine Williams' Appleton Locks walking tour. There I ran into Tom Sutter, who was also taking the tour. He and I walked together for a while. You might say we fell into a lockstep of a different sort and chatted. Tom mentioned that he was preparing a presentation for the Appleton Historical Society's upcoming season on the theme of Newberry Creek. The name caught my attention. I told Tom I had been compiling some information myself about the creek as it related to some of my ancestors who once lived on a section of it. He expressed interest in what I had, so I told him I would send him something when I had it together. At that time, I didn't have as much information about my family's connection with the creek as I would have liked. But my conversation with Tom spurred me on to keep my search going. Over the course of the following several months, I dug into history and got to know more about Appleton, Lawrence University, as well as the family. The following is an account of my search and many of my discoveries as they unfolded. And you'll see on that map an arrow pointing, yes indeed, to John Dick owning lot 4.7 acres, lot 52 there. And on the next page, what then became part of the Lawrence Athletic Fields and the Bonta Bowl. Now, Kathleen, do you want to come up and tell some of this story? The part I was going to tell was this. Grandma told me that she used to pick wildflowers and catch frogs in a creek near her home. I didn't think too much about the creek actually having a name, but years later I saw an 1878 map of Appleton and discovered that my grandmother's backyard included a section of Newbury Creek. And Kathleen's presentation is amazing. I ask you to read it all. I just want to read one more paragraph before I call her up. I can't help but try to imagine what it was like long ago when my grandmother was a girl and the sloping land was home to her. When I walk around that part of town and I look at the large old trees lining east-south River Street or lining the ridge of the Bontebole, I wonder if my grandmother once saw those trees too. By focusing my thoughts while writing these notes, it is somehow easier for me to imagine how things might have been. When I look out at the ravine, I see a fine football stadium, a legacy of many great college and community leaders. But I also see John and Caroline Dick, two devout, talented, hardworking immigrants, so grateful for a home in their new country, raising a generation of children, tending their land. I see my grandmother, Barbara, as a young girl, laughing, running, catching frogs, and picking wildflowers near Newberry Creek. Kathleen and John, who's up to bat next? John, you want to be next? You've got your mic on.
No,
This is John Gill.
I don't know. I'm going to try to show. You won't be able to see it very well, but I'm going to try to show. My computer wasn't working or didn't cooperate, so I don't have a booklet. One thing, with my ancestor, my grandfather and my dad's father and my mother's grandfather, because of the Indian area, they both had to smoke the peace pipe before they could purchase the land. And I'm going to try this. Okay, this isn't going to work, so I'll just talk as I look at the pictures. You won't be able to see them. One thing with the Institute of Paper Chemistry, now there's one of the buildings is, you'll see a sign that says Lawrence University. That wasn't part of Lawrence University before. And across the street from the down South River a little ways, what used to be an open field is now the Green Tree Ravine condominiums. So that's all built up, and I wish you could see this, but I have a picture of the stable on the Povolny farm. One of the walls of the house is actually the remainder of the stable. I've got a picture of 3 generations of myself, my dad, and my grandfather cross-country skiing along Christmas Tree Trail. On the farm, with the white picket fence all the way around the perimeter of the farm, I recall Esther and Norbert Harwood riding down Kernan Avenue on their dappled grays, and they were dressed up in the finest English riding outfits, and they were just, it wasn't trotting, but it was more than a canter. They were going down Kernan Avenue, which at that time didn't have curbs. They were riding down Kernan to Tallulah Park. And got several pictures of my dad. My dad actually lived with my aunt and uncle before he went to the service. And let me see. One thing with the golf course, I'm talking about some changes that have happened over the last few years. Now the golf course doesn't have any of the cement culverts, whatever. They all have a pond, so that cuts down on the water that's flowing from the creek, and it's better for the land. And then a little history. One of the houses along Kernan was owned by my grandmother's brother, and he sold it to my grandmother's cousin. And I have a little history there. Mrs. Stepinski, she was a very nice lady. She was the interpreter for the Institute of Paper Chemistry for 30 years, and she knew 7 different languages. In the farmhouse, when it was on Kernan Avenue, the Omans raised 10 children in that house. And our street had a lot of families with large families. Ours had 12. The people across the street had 8. 2 families right next to Reed Golf Course had 12 or 13. It's kind of hard to figure out sometimes. Let me see. Then right across the street from where I lived was Della Korth. She was the nutritionist for Lawrence University, and she would buy from my godparents 60 dozen eggs every other day. I do have a picture of the Grishupper's grocery store and the service station back in the 50s. And then Richmond School right across the street. That now covers the entire block. And that is the original location of the John D. Kernan farmhouse. And up the hill from the Bontebowl, where the Polzine and Angel Restaurant, those were changes. And another change that I didn't realize until just the other day, the College Avenue Bridge, the original one, in 1959, that was built. And that kind of comes in to the south side where the first paper mill for Appleton, owned by the Richmond brothers. And that's how Richmond School got its name. Then along, the creek actually goes further than what showed in the booklet. That the creek actually flowed just about to the where Newberry Street and Tallulah Park are. And along the island there, at one time, there were railroad ties stacked, and that my mother's father worked on the railroad there. I have many pictures of that. And right now, there's new condominiums and a hotel, and let me see. Then with a little bit about the family history, my dad came to Appleton in 1939 and lived with my aunt and uncle. His father came and worked during the week at Interlake paper mill, which was right on the island, and my uncle Alvin originally worked there, and one other person, I can't think of their name right now. My dad and my mother were married in Wittenberg. Both had a connection to two of the gangsters. Al Capone asked my dad how do you get to the county farm, and my aunt's brother Matt rode along with Al Capone and got paid $10 because he showed them where the county farm was. And it wasn't too far from my dad's property that Al Capone had a still. And then with my mother, her mother baked 13 loaves of bread, and John Dillinger happened to hop off the train. The tracks ran through their farm, and Dillinger hopped off the train because the hobos had a sign on the barn that said you could get a meal if you did a little work. Well, he did the little work, and he got the loaf of bread, and after he was gone, my grandmother couldn't find the two chickens that were hid under the wash tub. The feathers were there, but the chicken was gone. So, and my grandmother, how she relates to Appleton. Well, she was born in Greenville, but she lived in Appleton with her father right before she got married. She got married on June 22nd, or June 9th, 1922. And that day was the day of the 100-year storm. All locks, all dams, all bridges in Appleton were totally destroyed. At that time, it was a couple $1 million. In today's money, it would be about $34 million. And so no one could make it to her wedding. So there's no wedding picture. Let me see. What else? My phone just died, so let me see. The farm. There were over 50 houses that ended up being developed on that small parcel of land. Silver Spur Lane, which connected to South Meadows, Silver Spur Lane was the back entrance to the farm. And see. What else can I remember? I wish this would work. That might be about it. Oh, is that?
Thank you very much. I was
Oh,
looking
mine's up
forward to this evening, just as a person in the audience, but Tom asked if I would say a couple of things about my family, and I just wanted to start out by saying how fascinating it is that we don't really realize sometimes how the landscape has changed, because we're just sort of looking at little increments here and there, or maybe a big change here or a big change there. But when you start going back into history, just a completely different landscape emerges here. And hearing John talk about his experiences in the neighborhood around Newberry Creek, he mentioned a couple of names that sounded familiar to me in my experience, both growing up in Appleton and also researching a little bit about my ancestors who lived on property which is now part of the Bonta Bowl. My grandmother, who Tom had mentioned in quoted a section of my piece for his talk, grew up there. And when I was growing up in Appleton, I was on the south side, and I could see the Bonta Bowl, or the Lawrence Bowl as it was at that time, but I was always told that's where your grandmother grew up. So I saw it as both things, and I wanted to learn more, and so I dug in a little bit. So the piece that makes up the appendix sort of it's my discovery. I'm writing it as I'm discovering more and more things, so it will read a little bit like that. And sometimes I get kind of into what I'm looking at from old post-crescents and sort of elaborating on that. But I also have some family stories too. But if you look at the 1917 map, you will notice the name John Dick in that area. And it's a very recognizable area of the city because it comes to a sort of a little peak there. If you look at some of the maps, I have pictures of the maps included in my appendix here. So that John Dick is actually my great-grandfather. It's my maternal grandmother's father. And he came from Zwiesel, Bavaria, to the Fox Valley around 1873. And as far as I know, shortly after he and his wife arrived with at that time they had 3 young children, they settled in Appleton almost immediately and were raising their family on that property. And that's where my grandmother was born. And my great-grandfather did a lot of different things in his life. He was a carpenter, he was a saloon keeper, he was a millwright. He worked at the Interlake Mill for many, many years. He was even a janitor at Richmond School. But he ran the grocery store that became Grieshaber's. It was his store first, and then he ran that store with the family for many years, a couple decades, and then he sold it For a while, it belonged to his brother-in-law, John C. Hammer, and my grandmother's sister, Caroline, who was called Lee. So John and Lee Hammer ran the store for a while, and I think I did include a picture of it in the appendix here when it belonged to them. And then from there, then the Grieshabers took it over. So there's a lot of familiar names that run through some of the different accounts here from the different people that were working on this project. And so a lot of this you can, just peruse so you can see my process of discovery, but one of the things that was the most important to me was my discovery of the link between a family story that my great-grandparents or the Dick family sold the property to Lawrence University, and actually finding some proof of that after I started digging around, and hello, there. I started digging around, and I actually found an article about that, and part of the reason it took me so long was, the Post-Crescent is a great newspaper, but once in a while they make a mistake. Every so often. And they had a misspelling of my great-grandmother's name, and so I didn't see it right away, but I did find it. And it's on page 8 of the appendix that I have the article that I discovered. Her name is listed as Mrs. John Dix, D-I-X. So she did sell the property to Lawrence after the death of my great-grandfather. She continued to live on this section of the property, which is now where Angel's Restaurant is. That's where they actually had 2 houses or two dwellings. One was connected with the store, and then another one was standalone. And my great-grandmother continued to live in that house along with various family members up until 1959, when one of my great aunts, Teresa, was the last of the Dick family to live on the property on what was known as Maple Grove Street, and then eventually became part of John Street. And so that was quite a few years that members of the Dick family had a presence in that neighborhood. I just wanted to also mention one more thing here, because you'll be able to see my, as you read through, you'll be able to see the process that I had of searching various things. But I just wanted to read out loud a couple of my anecdotes here. A few decades ago, when the Good Company restaurant was Baxter's Food and Spirits for a time, members of my family and I took grandmother out for lunch. We all sat in an alcove surrounded by the signature old-fashioned decor. Grandma, ensconced in a wicker chair with a large shell-like back, looked around her and spotted a framed photo on the wall which depicted a gathering of young men in baseball gear. Pointing at the photo, Grandma began to identify many of the players by name, much to our surprise. It so happened that they had been on a team in her old Fourth Ward neighborhood. She mentioned the baseball field across the street from her home and how she used to go and watch the local teams play, The site once called Interlake Park, which later gave way to Mead Pool Park. Other than Grieshaber, I cannot now remember the names of the folks my grandma recognized from the photo, nor could I affix a year to either the photo or the lunch date. But the memory of that lunch, with that little slice of grandma's past for dessert, came to my mind as I researched local history and pondered the family stories. It made me wish that I could have at least one more talk with my grandmother about the days of her youth in Appleton. She passed away in 1997 at the age of 103. I have missed her every day since, but I am grateful for the time I spent with her. This year is her 130th birth anniversary and the 150th anniversary of her parents' arrival in Appleton. If Grandma were alive today, I wouldn't be surprised if she still recognized the land around the ravine, even with all the changes that have taken place there over the years. Many years after that lunch with Grandma, I took my mother out to lunch at Angel's Restaurant at 1401 East John Street. At that time, it was still fairly new. I think it was called Seven Angels then. While chatting with the owner, Mom mentioned that her mother had grown up on the property. The owner told my mother and me that when the builders were preparing the ground for construction of the restaurant, they discovered part of an old foundation that would likely have been the one for the standalone house, which was home to John Sr., Caroline, John Jr., Kate, Teresa, and other members of the Dick family over the years. The address was the same. And I go on a little bit there, but I just wanted to share that because I'm grateful that even though doing this project made me want to know more, I was grateful for what I was able to find out, and I was grateful for the time that I did spend with my grandma. I think Edna Ferber had the same regret when thinking about not spending more time with her father and asking her father about her past. So I'd say that if there's anybody that you want to know something about, do it as soon as you can.
Yeah.
So, or if you have grandchildren or somebody that you want, if you want them to know the people that were important to you in your life, find a way, because that's how we keep people alive in our memories and in other people's lives. And maybe those lives will be a better inspiration for the people that come after them. So thanks, and I guess I'm done.